Since the beginning of the invasion of the Russian Federation troops on the territory of Ukraine, the management bodies and units of the Kharkiv garrison of the State Emergencies Service have switched to a reinforced operating mode and are operating in martial law mode. During this time, more than 3,500 combat missions were made to provide assistance to the civilian population, extinguish fires, neutralize explosive devices, conduct search and rescue operations, and remove debris from residential and administrative buildings destroyed by enemy shelling. Most of the rescue work had to be carried out under enemy fire. About 1,000 rescuers and more than 250 units of special and rescue equipment were involved daily from the main office of the State Service of Emergency Situations in the Kharkiv region to fulfill the tasks of liquidating the consequences of the shelling and assisting the population. The rescuers have liquidated more than 900 fires, which were caused by the enemy's gunfire since the beginning of the war. There were more departures of units to North Saltovka and other neighborhoods of Kharkov, Zhukovsky settlement, Rogan and Horizon. The most critical situation in the region's districts was in the cities of Izyum and Balakleya. Many fires had to be extinguished in the cities of Dergachi, Zolochev, Merefa and Chuguev. High-rise apartment buildings and the private sector, commercial facilities, educational institutions, warehouses and administrative buildings were on fire. For example, in the morning of March 1st, enemy missiles struck the building of the Kharkiv Regional State Administration, causing destruction in the building and killing at least 10 people. 24 people were injured. Rescuers assisted in rescuing the victims, dismantling the rubble and retrieving the victims and the bodies of the dead from under it. Work on dismantling the structures was repeatedly halted due to constant shelling and the possibility of repeated airstrikes. Overall, rescue and recovery operations continued until the end of March. 29 bodies of the dead were recovered from under the rubble. On March 2nd, the center of Kharkiv was again massively bombed. Rockets hit the buildings of the main directorate of the National Police and the Security Service of Ukraine, as well as a university building. The buildings caught fire immediately. The area of the fire exceeded 1,000 square meters. During the rescue work, State Emergencies Service fighters rescued 10 people from under the rubble. Unfortunately, 4 people were killed. Work on removing the debris lasted for about 2 weeks. A total of 6 bodies were recovered from under the rubble. During the next few days in March, the enemy continued to hit residential areas and entire settlements with its deadly bombs, shells and rocket artillery, cynically killing civilians. The cities of Kharkiv and Izyum, as well as the villages of Yakovlovka and Koroshevo in the Kharkiv district of the region, were subjected to heavy strikes. Also, the center of Kharkiv was subjected to a massive rocket attack. The missiles struck 2 ignited administrative buildings. The area of the fire was 600 square meters. During the rescue work, State Emergencies Service fighters rescued 10 people from under the rubble. Unfortunately, 4 people died. On March 3rd, the enemy launched a massive bombardment of the Saltovka residential area, which resulted in fires in 30 residential buildings at once. To extinguish these fires, 55 units of fire rescue equipment and more than 200 rescuers from all district departments of Kharkiv city and adjacent districts of the region were involved. More than 200 people were rescued and evacuated by the firefighters while extinguishing the fires. On March 14th, an enemy missile hit a 4-story residential building in the center of Kharkiv. As a result of the explosion, part of the building structures of the house were destroyed. There were 10 rescue units of the State Emergencies Service on the scene, which were removing the rubble and searching for victims. 1 person was rescued and the bodies of 4 victims were recovered. On March 15th, rescuers extinguished a fire in 5-story apartment buildings in the Sloboda district of Kharkiv, which had been damaged by enemy shelling. 9 units of equipment and 30 rescuers were involved. A total of 35 residents were rescued and evacuated. Later, the rescuers carried out work on the removal of debris. On March 16th, the enemy struck different districts of Kharkiv, which resulted in a fire of warehouse buildings in the Slobodsky district of the city. The area of the fire was about 1,500 square meters. At the scene of the fire, 2 rescuers were injured. Also, there was a fire at one of Saltovka's markets. The area of the fire was over 3,500 square meters. Another rescuer was injured by shrapnel wounds on the scene. A total of 12 units of fire and rescue equipment and about 100 people, from the staff of the State Emergencies Service, worked on these fires. On March 17th, as a result of another shelling, enemy missiles hit one of the largest shopping centers in Kharkiv, Barabashovo Market. As a result of the shelling, trade pavilions in different places of the market caught fire. The fire extinguishing was repeatedly suspended because of the repeated shelling. There were 21 units of fire and rescue equipment and about 100 rescuers on the scene. All efforts of the rescue service units were aimed at preventing the flames from spreading to the housing sector and other adjacent objects. On March 18 in Kharkiv, as a result of enemy shelling, one of the city's institutions of higher education suffered severe damage and neighboring residential buildings were also damaged. In addition, fires broke out in the apartments of the residential 9 floors. One person was killed, and about 10 people were injured. Rescuers rescued one woman in the fire, as well as recovered one man from under the rubble. The fire was promptly extinguished in 2 residential buildings. State Service of Emergencies involved 55 people and 13 vehicles. Later, the rescuers carried out work to remove the rubble. At the end of March, the rescue service began to receive single reports about the fires in the residential districts of Northern Saltovka in Kharkiv. On March 31, there were reports of fires caused by enemy fire. 10 apartments on 5 floors were burning. While extinguishing the fire, 2 elderly women were rescued. 8 units of fire and rescue equipment and 30 rescuers were involved in extinguishing the fires. On April 2nd, the biggest fire caused by shelling occurred in the morning in the Zhukovsky district of Kharkiv. There were 14 apartments from the 4th to 9th floors of the residential 9-story building on fire. The total area of the fire was about 700 square meters. Rescuers fought the fire for 8 hours. On April 7th, the emergency service received a report of a fire in a shopping center in Kharkiv. The roof and part of the premises on the 3rd and 4th floors of the building were on fire. The area of the fire was about 2,300 square meters. In fire suppression, 80 people were involved and 18 units of fire rescue equipment of the State Emergency Service. On the 13th of April, a fire in a warehouse building in Nemyshlyansky district of Kharkiv was reported. 12 units of equipment and about 50 firemen were sent to the place of fire. The total area of the fire made about 4,000 square meters. It took 7 hours to extinguish the fire. On the 16th of April, it was reported that the fire was caused by the enemy's rocket that hit the administrative building in the Ozhnyansky district of Kharkiv. The structural elements of the 5-story administrative building on a total area of about 1,500 square meters and 9 cars were on fire. In addition, as a result of the explosion, the building was badly damaged, 2 people died and 18 more were injured. There were 10 units of equipment and about 50 firefighters working. Thanks to the prompt action of rescuers, it was possible to evacuate 65 people from the building, as well as from neighboring buildings and residences struck by the shelling. The largest fire occurred on April 16th, on the territory of an enterprise in the Industrialny district of Kharkiv. Wooden pallets and plastic packaging burned on an area of about 6,000 square meters. The fire was extinguished by 12 departments of the State Emergency Service. The firefighters managed to save a large part of the company's products, as well as to prevent the flames from spreading to nearby objects. On April 17th, as a result of the shelling of the central part of Kharkiv, shells of the enemy's rocket artillery hit 18 residential apartment buildings, of which one apartment building burned down on the 4th and 5th floors, covering about 500 square meters. In other cases, there were localized fires. To eliminate these fires, 160 firefighters and 33 pieces of equipment were involved by the Salvation Service. On April 17th, a fire was reported as a result of an enemy missile strike in a building that housed offices and commercial premises. The area of the fire was about 1,200 square meters. At the scene worked 9 units of fire and rescue equipment and 40 firefighters. On the night of April 30th, as a result of enemy shelling, there was a fire in a warehouse building in the Nemyshlyansky district of Kharkiv. The area of the fire was more than 9,000 square meters. 12 units of fire rescue equipment and 50 personnel of the State Emergency Service worked at the scene. About 250 people were rescued from under the rubble during search and rescue operations. The bodies of 142 victims were also recovered during debris removal. As of April 24th, work on 41 destroyed objects was completed. The largest search operations and debris removal were carried out in the Kievsky, Novobovarsky, Shevchenkovsky, Industrialny and Moskovsky districts of Kharkiv. Rescuers from Kharkiv, Poltava and Dnipropetrovsk garrisons of the State Emergency Service, the National University of Civil Defense of Ukraine, the Interregional Center for Humanitarian Demining and Rapid Response, as well as volunteers and community services employees, were involved in the work to clear the rubble of destroyed homes and administrative buildings. Also, during firefighting, debris removal, and other emergency response operations, specialists from the Emergency Medical Care Center work together with rescue workers under fire. Medics help firefighters rescue people and assist the public. State Emergency Services engineers have made more than 2,500 trips since the start of the war, and have defused more than 1,500 enemy munitions. The pyrotechnicians made more than 50 trips every day to defuse ammunition, and in the first days of the war more than 100 times. In addition, before emergency rescue work in destroyed buildings, sappers conduct searches in rubble, find remnants of explosive objects or missiles, and disarm them. On April 11th, sappers from the State Service for Emergency Situations and explosive ordnance engineers of the National Police conducted explosive ordnance works in residential areas and the private sector of Kharkiv. The enemy attacked the city with anti-tank mines with self-destructors in combat conditions. Explosive objects could not be touched under any circumstances, therefore they were destroyed right on the spot by detonation. Roads and bridges were damaged due to the combat operations, and some settlements were cut off from the fire and rescue units of the State Emergency Service. To eliminate the fires in these towns and villages, the way of rescuers was more than 80 kilometers. In particular, in the village of Slobozhansky, Chugevsky area, an employee of the State Emergency Service organized a volunteer fire department, which included veterans of our service and local residents. They are on duty 24 hours a day and respond promptly to all fires and emergencies. Unfortunately, there are losses among the personnel of the State Emergency Service of Kharkiv. On March 17th, the rescuer of the 5th State Fire and Rescue Unit, Sergeant of Civil Protection Service Podolsky Alexander, died in the performance of his duties. He was survived by his parents, wife, and son. 4 more officers were wounded during the war. They also performed combat missions. They are undergoing medical treatment. On April 16th, 3 sappers of the Interregional Center for Humanitarian Demining and Rapid Response of the State Service of Ukraine for Emergency Situations died in the performance of their service duty: Andrei Koshurko, Yuri Stadnik, and Oleg Gerasimov. 4 more pyrotechnicians were injured. Because of constant bombardment, rocket and artillery fire, as well as air raid alarms, employees of the main department of the State Emergency Service and district units had to work in shelters for a certain period of time. For example, during the first days of the war, the duty unit of the main directorate was transferred to a bomb shelter to ensure uninterrupted operation, and to this day all the 101 and 112 telephone lines work as usual. During the war, some units of the rescue service, as well as fire and rescue equipment, were damaged due to shelling. For example, at the 4th and 18th State Fire and Rescue Units, windows and exit gates were damaged due to shelling. And one of the oldest fire stations in Kharkiv, a historic architectural monument and the pride of rescuers, suffered serious damage as a result of 2 bombardments. The war, uncertainty, and insecurity about the future, the loss of loved ones and homes, depress and negatively affect people's psyche. The elderly, people with disabilities, and children are particularly affected. To help them withstand all the problems that war brings, psychologists of the State Emergency Service in different formats and in all possible ways provide psychological support, conduct training, and just communicate, trying to calm down, give advice, and the like. There are different games for children. All of this allows them to relax, release emotional tension, and restore a feeling of safety and psycho-emotional comfort. In addition, psychologists are constantly involved in rendering psychological aid to the affected population. During their stay in the shelter of the main department, the children prepared a small theatrical animation for the rescuers. In turn, the rescuers treated the kids with sweets. Specialists of the State Emergency Service always give explanatory talks to parents and adults about the danger of mines, preventing injury and death during enemy attacks, as well as procedures for action in case of any emergency. Rescue workers talk to people hiding from bombing in subway stations and shelters, as well as during rescue operations. In war, there must be room for pleasant emotions. Women rescuers, as well as children with their mothers and grandmothers, who are just hiding from the enemy's shelling in the protective structure of the main department, received congratulations on International Women's Day on March 8 from the management and staff of the Kharkiv garrison of the State Emergency Service. The employees of the State Emergency Service honorably perform their duty and are faithful to their oath. The achievements are such, thanks to the support of People's Deputies of Ukraine, the leadership of local authorities, and personally Oleg Sinigobov, chairman of the Kharkiv Regional Military Administration, Igor Terekov, Kharkiv mayor, as well as international organizations, the whole Ukrainian society, volunteers, and Kharkiv citizens. The rescuers of the Kharkiv region are infinitely grateful to everyone who cares, to everyone who helps to provide the necessary equipment to perform the assigned tasks. Thanks to this support, the Kharkiv garrison of the State Emergency Service was replenished with a lot of fire rescue equipment and gear. The head of the State Service for Emergency Situations, Sergei Kruk, repeatedly visited the Kharkiv garrison during the war. Sergei Kruk noted the heroism of Kharkiv rescuers and awarded the best workers of our service. The head of the Kharkiv Regional Military Administration, Oleg Sinigobov, repeatedly came to the rescue service units to thank the rescuers for their hard and selfless work, and he constantly helped in providing techniques and technical equipment. In addition, while visiting the city of Kharkiv, the public figure, vocalist, and frontman of the band Ocean Elzy, Sviatoslav Vakarchuk, visited the rescue service units to support the rescuers. The musician thanked the rescuers for their courage and gave his songs. Together, we are strong. Together, we will win. We believe that good times will come and the war will be over.
Закінчиться війна, там загубив себе, побачив аж до дна.
Темних